You're live.
Good evening, everyone. It is currently Tuesday, August 8th, 2023 at 6:06 p.m. and I will call to order the meeting of the Cleveland Community Police Commission Budget and Grants Committee. So first order of the agenda is to do a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner Zayed.
Present.
Commissioner Van Lier.
Present.
Commissioner Kennedy.
Present.
Commissioner Garrett-Ferguson is running late, and Commissioner Adams, I am present as well. So basically, what we would like to do our items for agenda. The first item on our agenda is Delonte Spencer Thomas, the Chief Ethics Officer for the City of Cleveland, was going to come and give us sort of like an overview and an update on awarding the grants and the ethics and recusal review. But he is currently not here. So what we will do is we'll just move on to the next item on the agenda, and whenever he arrives, we will put him into a slot. So what we would like to do now, and I would like to encourage the other members of the committee to please jump in wherever you would see fit, because we know that this has definitely been a joint venture that we've all been working on for over 6 months now. So please feel free to jump in, but I wanted to just sort of give the community an update about where we are on the grant process, where we are heading in the process, and sort of what loose timelines we are working with. So, you know, one of the things that happens with this is that we have the part that we have to play, the staff has the part that they have to play, but we also have to work with the city legal department, and we also have to work with the finance department as well. And so although we are an important part of this grant making and rewarding process, we are not the only entity. So we will ask for patience in the community. We are going to move this along as quickly as we can, but we also must follow the city charter. We must also follow state code. And so we are going along the way, ensuring that we remain in complete compliance with all of the laws that we are beholden to. So with that said, I would like to, again, thank this committee. I would also, even though she's no longer on the committee, I would like to thank Commissioner Co-Chair Rodriguez, because she was very instrumental in laying the groundwork and the foundation for this entire program to exist. So even though she's no longer technically on the committee, she's definitely been there for lots of conversations and feedback and suggestions on how to keep this program rolling and developing it in this first year. So I really would like to just continue to thank the committee, again, Commissioner Van Lier and Commissioner Zayed for holding that work group down and pushing the business forward when I was dealing with some personal issues. So I just think this committee has been almost like a model for the commission on how to push work forward, how to work together, and how to keep the business of the community first and foremost in the work that we do. So I want to thank everyone on this committee, because I'm really proud of what we've accomplished so far, and I know that we're going to continue to do great things. So just like some basic logistical things just for the community. Personally, I know that I had talked to I think everyone on this committee about my concerns about if our deadlines are too tight, if we were going to get enough grants, if we were going to get the money. I think Commissioner Zayed was a little bit more confident than I was, but we had a plan B in place in case things did not work out, but we didn't need to put the plan B in place because she ended up being correct. So just to give the public some information, we received about 92 grant applications, and I added up everything, and I think the total amount requested was about $4.6 million, somewhere around there. So what that tells me is that there is definitely a need for the work that we're doing. And what I would like to say to the community is that we unfortunately will not be able to award grants to everyone that applied, and probably not to everyone who's qualified for a grant. So I would encourage anyone who does not get the desired result at the end of this process, to be looking for us early next year as we open up a new round of applications. And then also, I think that we are also going to become, advocates through this process, that we are going to advocate for what we learn about community work and grassroots organizations through this committee. So although we may not be able to award everyone, I think that for me, this has been quite a learning process, and also sort of a reality check about just how great the needs in the community are. So I would like to say that thank you to everyone that applied. And then we also wanted to educate the public on sort of the process about how we will score grants and how we will make our selections. So we do have a rubric. I think this is a question that has been circulating around with people who have applied and people who are interested in sort of like what the transparency piece will look like. And from my knowledge, that has happened on a grassroots individual level up to even like the monitor team wondering that how it's going to be, because this is a big deal that we are awarding these grants for this first time. So we want to be as transparent as possible, because again, as Coach Rodriguez always says, like this is the community's money, right? This is the people's money, and so we want to make sure that we are responsible with the people's money. So what I think we will do at this point, I think I'm going to the review process. I'll move that to after Delonte Spencer Thomas. And I will just say one last thing, that we have a timeline, but it has to remain open to the different entities that we have to work with. So we closed the grants on July 31st. They were closed to everyone, so no one was allowed to submit an application after the deadline, but we did allow applicants who submitted incomplete applications to have some time to complete those applications. So if someone was this Friday, if they were missing like a budget, or they were missing like a supporting letter that they needed, they were missing something from their fiscal agent, we gave them that time to submit those documents, but we did not allow any applications to be submitted after that deadline, just to be fair to everyone. So we are working with still we're shooting for an August 31st deadline to review the applications. And when we review those applications, I don't want people to think that that means that the process is over and that is the complete end, because there's two pieces of this process that I think that, through the work group, I think Commissioner Zayed is taking the lead on this, but we are going to split the scoring into two parts, right? Do you want to actually talk about that, since you've kind of been doing a lot of the work on that?
So what we developed is a two-part scoring system. 40% of the total weight of the application will be scored by the rubric. And I believe right now it's, 1 through, let's see.
7.
There's about 7 questions, with the total score being possibly 32. There's
28. That was
28.
28. That was a typo.
Okay. So, I mean, the only thing is, I think that I did, because the intent of the charter was to have these available for all organizations, but primarily grassroots organizations. I was thinking about talking to you guys to see if you wanted to add a few questions in the rubric to kind of speak to the intent of the charter with those grassroots organizations, to just ask, like, maybe what was the and maybe the intent with founding the organization. Did it start off that way, or is this a grassroots organization? Things like that, just to stay in line with the intent of the charter. But that's up for debate. But whatever, so whatever rubric we finalize when we use for scoring, that will be weighted for 40% of the total application, and then 60% will be the scores from their interviews that we have, and we're working on those interview questions as we speak.
I'm gonna, that item of business, so this is exactly why I put the new business, which was like about the grant rubric.
Yeah,
So just to give you that opportunity
okay.
to bring that to the commission, and then we can figure out, to the committee, and can make a group decision about that. But it looks like we do have, Chief Ethics Officer Delonte Spencer Thomas here. So I would like to, give him the opportunity to educate us and make sure that we don't break any laws.
All right, good evening. So I wanted to, when I spoke with Commissioner Adams last week, and we briefly discussed a number of different things that this committee and the commission as a whole will want to be mindful of with respect to handling funds. And you guys are responsible for overseeing the management of over $1 million, and that's a huge undertaking and responsibility, and just some things that you want to be mindful of with respect to conflicts of interest, et cetera. And so I discussed some things that I also had discussed with other folks in the administration when we were dealing with ARPA funding, right? And so the city had over $300 million that we needed to disperse and get rid of. Well, not get rid of, but utilize, utilize and get it out the door, right? And making sure it gets put in worthwhile projects, et cetera. But one of the things that comes with that are inherent conflicts, right? And so those types of conflicts are probably or impliedly more inherent with this particular group because you're here representing the community, right? And so this isn't necessarily your full-time jobs. Well, not necessarily. This isn't your full-time jobs, or that you have other responsibilities. You're part of other organizations. So between the 13 commissioners, the 4 staff members, right, there are things that you guys want to be thinking about with respect to how you manage this. And so I wanted to, or we thought it was a good idea to just do a quick refresher on, kind of what constitutes a conflict of interest, and I really just wanted to have an informal conversation. So I didn't necessarily want to do a formal, presentation per se, but just to have a conversation, and then to also just kind of give you guys an example of one thing that we use. So with ARPA funding, how we ended up allocating funds was part of our Center for Economic Recovery. We had different directors or project or initiative leads, ultimately be responsible for coming up with the different initiatives or ideas or things like that. And so in recognizing the need or potential for conflicts, I came up with like a disclosure form, so to speak, or no, not so to speak. It was a disclosure form for those who were involved to be able to disclose whether it was different companies, businesses, organizations, et cetera, that you may be a part of, to avoid the potential conflicts that may come about. And so I just want to make sure that I can address any questions or concerns that you may have with things that might come up. So that being said, with respect to a conflict of interest, and I want to be clear about, or I want to make a distinction. So one is the actual, there's kind of the legality of a conflict of interest, and then there's kind of code of conduct, so to speak, right? So, or the appearance of conflict. And so I want to make sure that piece is explicitly clear, because those two are not necessarily the same things. Now, as I expressed to you guys when we did, ethics training right back earlier in the year, that you're always able to have stricter requirements, right? So the information that I'm giving you is about the floor and not the ceiling, right? So you can always have stricter policies or stricter standards if you want to apply them that way. Because sometimes that just might be in the best interest, is, hey, maybe we have a stricter policy than what the actual law is on this. So when we refer to conflicts of interest, so we're talking about two different things. One is your private personal interest, right? So whether that's a personal interest or it's a private business interest. And so there is a conflict, or a conflict of interest exists where you have both a personal interest and a city interest, right? So for example, if you sit on the board of another organization, right, and that organization submitted an application for funding, right? And so the analysis here is you'd have to look at what is your relationship with each entity. So as commissioners, you all took an oath to act in the best interests of the city and the community by being here, right? So you have a fiduciary interest as representatives of the city by serving on this commission, right? If you sit or serve on another board, now this is not to mean, or I want to make a caveat, this is not for if you volunteer somewhere, right? This is if you actually sit on a board where you either took an oath or you made a commitment to act in the best interest of that organization. So that could be your job. That could be your full-time job as a part of or condition of your employment. It could be a nonprofit board that you sit on, or some other committee or executive role. Again, where you took an oath or you made a commitment to act in the best interest of that organization. If that is in fact the case, then you also have a fiduciary interest in that entity as well, right? And so ultimately, the conflict of interest provisions here that would apply prohibit you as public officials from acting or potentially acting on conflicts. And I want to be clear that the standard is not necessarily that you did act or that you acted to benefit yourself or otherwise, but that you put yourself in a position to where you could have, right? So does that distinction make clear? Because the common pushback that we get is, well, no, I can be fair, right? I can be impartial, even though that's my organization. I'm going to treat them the same, right? I don't care about that, right? Because the standard is, did you put yourself in a position to where you could have acted improperly, not whether you actually did or not, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually benefited yourself, because that's the other pushback we get sometimes when people don't understand this is, well, I didn't actually benefit from it, right? I didn't get a kickback from this, or I didn't, I didn't get a benefit. My family member didn't get a benefit, so there's no issue. But again, that's not the standard, right? The standard is, did you put yourself in a position where you could have acted improperly? So again, and where you have a conflict is not only for your own personal benefit, but where you might benefit, where your family member might benefit, or where your business associate or business organization might benefit, right? And so a business associate could be a coworker at your full-time jobs. It could be if you're a co-owner of an LLC or a partnership or some other entity, right? Those who you work with in that entity could also be a business associate as well. Or it could just be an organization, as I stated before, like a nonprofit, right? So for example, I serve on the board of trustees for Cleveland State's Law School Alumni Association, right? So if that organization were to submit funds and or submit an application for funds, and somehow I'm on the city side of things, right? That's a situation where I have a conflict. And so if and when a conflict presents itself, and I want to be clear that it is not a violation to just have a conflict of interest. Okay, it is not a violation to just have one. Okay, we absolutely expect there to be conflicts of interest, right? You all are involved in numbers of different ways in the community. You're involved in other organizations. You have jobs. Your family members are involved in organizations. Your family members have jobs, right? And so it's not necessarily a problem that a conflict exists. It's what you do with that conflict if and when it presents itself. Okay. And so the obligation here is that you first disclose it. Okay. If you have a conflict of interest, whether it's a potential conflict or an actual one, right? Because this is an area where you definitely want to make sure that you err on the side of caution. Right. So don't come to your own determination that I think this is okay. This is probably not a problem. And then you get halfway in and you realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe this is a problem, right? Because then it's too late and you've already committed a crime. Okay. And again, what I'm talking about here are the actual commissions of crimes, not a violation of a code of conduct, not a violation of a rule or bylaw, an actual criminal offense. Okay. If you have used your public position to benefit yourself, to benefit a family member, or to benefit a business associate or an organization in which you have an interest. Okay. If you've done that, you have committed a crime. All right. We clear on that part? Okay. So first piece is disclosure. Okay. So and you can come up with what that disclosure process looks like, whether that means you need to put something in writing to the full committee, to the full commission, whatever the case may be, but make sure that there is some process for what is going to be the acceptable disclosure piece, right? And usually that's just putting it in writing, right? So you have committee chairs, so use that, right? Put it to the chair. Hey, I have a conflict. I'm involved with this organization. I work at this organization. My sister, my brother works here. My whomever works there, right? So speaking of relatives, though, I do want to go back and quickly touch on defining relative, right? So there's a legal standard in Ohio ethics law, but you may want to, for the appearance or to avoid the appearance of impropriety and acting out of or in the abundance of caution, is something you may want to heighten. But at a bare minimum, your family member includes your spouse. It includes your siblings. It includes your parents. It includes your children. It includes your grandchildren. It includes your grandparents. Okay. And that is regardless of where any of them live. Okay. That's regardless of wherever they live, however old they are. Minor children, adult children, doesn't matter. Okay. Those people will always potentially create conflicts for you. In addition to that, it also includes your aunts, your uncles, your nieces, your nephews, anybody else that's related to you by blood or marriage, if that person lives with you. Okay, if that person lives with you, right? So, for example, you have an aunt who lives with you, conflict. That same aunt does not live with you, technically no legal conflict. Okay. But again, I would encourage you to err on the side of caution, avoiding the appearance of impropriety, right? And staying away from the family relationships altogether, right? Because once you put yourself in a position where you're having to defend yourself, then you've already lost. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Right. So if you have to come to the table ready to argue, well, this is technically this person fits in, and let's just not do that. Right. Especially as your first go around at this, all the more reason to be as high above board as you possibly can. Okay. So again, So family members acting to benefit them, to benefit yourself, or to benefit the organization that you have an interest in. What else? Any questions so far? Okay. So where potential conflicts could come up, right, is obviously going to be, the organizations or entities that you may be associated with outside of your work for the city. And now that does not mean that those organizations can't apply for funds, right? What it means is you as the public official cannot use your position to benefit that organization, right? So what does that mean? Because after you've disclosed your conflict, the second piece is to recuse yourself, right? One of the common misconceptions when it comes to recusal is recusing or abstaining from voting. That is part of it, but that's not the whole thing. Okay, so to properly recuse yourself where you have a conflict of interest is to completely withdraw and completely remove yourself from the situation or from the matter. That includes even discussion. Okay, so if your organization or a family member's organization has submitted an application, it would be improper. So you don't get to be at the table, have the conversations about it, and then when it's time to vote, say, oh, wait a minute, this is actually my sister's organization, so I'm going to be hands off now. Okay. At that point, you've already acted on the conflict if you were part of the conversation. So again, so recuse yourself is to completely withdraw. That includes even discussion. So no voting on it, no talking about it, no moving the application along, no getting it to the right hands or saying, hey, talk to this person, no telling your relatives or your business associates, hey, well, here's the chair of the committee, why don't you give him a call and see what they can do. No extra pointers, no giving information that would not have otherwise been available to the general public. Okay, we good with that? Yeah, question.
So let's just say we let's just say we assisted with an application or maybe provided any kind of guidance. We need to recuse ourselves in that situation, if that's what I'm understanding.
Two different things. So are we talking about an application or an applicant for someone who you're not connected with?
So, I mean, I know the staff may have, or I know like commissioners may have just guided. So I guess I just want more clarification on utilizing your position for a benefit. Would that be considered, or, you know, you see someone that needs some assistance and you just provide further assistance?
So if you are not personally benefiting, your family member is not is not benefiting, or you're not part of the organization, right, where you have a fiduciary interest in that organization, then just providing information that would have otherwise been provided to anybody in the general public is perfectly fine. Now, if somebody says, hey, you're on the CPC and I'm going to be applying for this grant, and well, if you help me get this, or you help me fill out my application, or help me through the process, then I'm going to cut you back $1,000, right? Then we got a problem. But if you're just helping in the same way that you would help anyone else, right, that's okay, so long as you're not getting some private or personal benefit on the side, so long as you're not helping your relative, right? If it's your sister's organization or your sister's application, then unfortunately you've already gone too far and we need to pull that application out. Okay, yeah, question.
So let's just say that someone reaches out and they just want to know, like, what's the definition of restorative justice? So I send them the list of definitions that we have posted on the website. Would that be considered that?
Good question. So no, I don't think that, my opinion would be that that's not a conflict.
As long as it's the information that's just like posted that you give to everyone, no matter what the relationship, it probably wouldn't be an issue.
Correct. It's all the same information that the general public would have access to. Where you may come into issue is if there's additional information given, right, to say, well, yeah, we're looking at restorative justice programming, but FYI, here's the type of programs we're really looking for, right? Or these programs will probably get funded a little bit better than these types of programs.
Like, what do they mean by violence interruption? What do they mean by, mediation? So I just either say go to the website, or I'll, kind of copy and paste and send it or something.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. Totally fine.
So
want to make sure I understand what you are saying. So I could have actually assisted someone in filling their application out and then turn around and evaluate that same application according to the rubric when I know what that rubric is and could possibly have helped develop that application that would have given it an edge over other applications?
So good question. And so, and this is the very type of example of the distinction that I'm making between the floor and the ceiling with respect to the standard that you guys are going to hold yourselves to, right? Because so long as the floor of the legal standard is you cannot use your public position to benefit yourself, a family member, or an organization in which you have an interest, right? So technically, under the example that you just gave, so long as you're not personally benefiting, your family member isn't personally benefiting, or an organization in which you have an interest isn't benefiting, that's technically okay, right? However, I think that there is an appearance issue here, right? There's an additional layer to consider if it plays out exactly how you just said, right? You have someone who's going to potentially evaluate applications and helping to get those through, because while the legal standard may stop at family members, et cetera, but policy wise, for a number of different reasons, that could extend beyond that, right? So, for example, our ethics policy in the city with respect to, hiring or nepotism or things like that, it goes beyond just that definition of family, right? And it extends to, those who you have a close relationship with, right? So it might include a friend, or it might include somebody who's like a brother that technically could skirt around the law, but for all intent and purposes, this just feels improper, right? And so that's also a standard that I think that that this commission should consider and think about in terms of what that engagement is going to look like, what's okay, what's not okay, right? Personal opinion, or the guidance that I would give, I should say, just formally would be, I think to Commissioner Zayed's point, directing people to the language, even if you need to send it to them directly, if because I understand that there are connectivity issues and things like that maybe people don't have online access, and so those types of things, so that everyone has a fair shot and has the same shot.
I even printed out the definitions because so many people were asking, so I could just
Yeah.
it's like any sentence speaking for me.
Yeah, and as
Without me saying much.
right, and as a rule of thumb, I would encourage you to stick with that. When you start getting into the weeds of, I'll just write it for you, or let me just do this, then you run into issues, because you will get the argument, or you will get the complaint that, wait a minute, I saw such and such, or such and such told me that Commissioner such and such helped me and did their application for them, and when they end up with their $10,000, then we gonna have a problem, whether it was legal or not, right? And the court of public opinion won't care about what's legal. They're going to care about what feels unfair.
I think that's the piece that I was concerned about, that latter example, not the piece that Commissioner Zayed mentioned.
Yeah.
But when you actually have them fill out an application, when you actually have, an applicant fill the application out, knowing that you're going to be helping to evaluate that application, it seems to me that application could potentially have an edge over any other application that's submitted during the evaluation process.
Yes.
Chief Thomas, can you walk them through, so there's approximately 90 applications, right?
Oh, wow.
And this is the group who will most likely this whole group will probably be taking either chunks or evaluating them all, right? Can you walk commissioners through the process if there is one application out of that 90 that they feel they're connected to in any of these ways you described, what exactly they should do?
Yep. So, good question. Disclosure so disclosure is always the first piece, right? So an application comes through and you decide, or you see it, you look at it like, uh-oh, wait a minute, didn't realize this organization was submitting an application. I sit on the board for this organization, and that's an immediate stop the press, don't do anything else, don't analyze, don't keep reviewing. That's the moment to press pause and state, declare in writing, whatever the case may be, hey, I have a conflict of interest. This is my organization. I need to recuse myself, right? And again, from there, you're not to be involved in the conversations, in the discussion, in the review, in the vetting, et cetera. And, you know, there is, so that would be common practice in that particular scenario.
Is it just for that organization, or do they have to recuse from the whole process then? So can they just say, I'm not involved in evaluating this particular one, right? So that, what if we potentially lost everybody because out of that 90, everyone was connected to at least one, right? So what do we do to make sure that they can still participate in the process lawfully without breaking those laws, if that's the case?
So if I'm understanding the question, actually, no, repeat the question.
Okay. So let's say there's 90 applications. The commissioner says, well, I'm attached to one of these.
Yeah.
Can they still participate in evaluating any of the other 89 applications?
Gotcha. So the short answer is it depends. You know, I think that there's definitely a path forward to still be able to be a part of the overall process by recusing yourself from where you actually have a conflict. I think the concern is going to be in additional detail. So, for example, you know, if you're in the vetting process and you realize that I want to give you a realistic hypothetical of how this might happen. Okay, go ahead.
The company that I work for,
Can you use the microphone?
the company that I work for applied for the grant. So we use that one.
So if there becomes an opportunity where acting on another application could have an impact on the application that you're conflicted out on, that could potentially prohibit you from being involved on other applications. So for example, we've had, in employment decisions, right, we have ultimately come down or weighed in on situations where we've said, hey, you know, if there's 3 people competing for a job, right, and your brother is one of the applicants, but maybe you intentionally say the other applicants are bad so that your brother gets the job, then there's a way where you have still acted in a way to benefit your relative, right? And so if there's a scenario where that could happen, and I don't know, you know, and this is me not knowing, you know, the exact dollar amount you have to give out versus the exact dollar amount of what's been requested. I don't know how many layers of review you're going to do before you get to that point. But if acting on other matters can still potentially benefit yourself, a relative, or your organization, that could potentially be a problem. But again, I don't want to just give one blanket rule on that, because the answer will be very specific in the details. And so any provision of ethics law is always going to be explicitly fact specific, right? So it's difficult to give one blanket rule with that type of scenario without seeing all of the facts in the totality of circumstances.
Is it possible to get some guidelines on that in the near future? Because I think we may have more than one commissioner in that situation at this table, and it has two problems for us. Overall, 115.5 says approval of the commission, which I'm assuming a majority vote of the commission for the end grantee list. So after this committee will vet it, vote it forward to the full commission to approve the final list of grantees and the dollar amounts that they're getting, right? So now we have two problems. We have elimination of some people in this committee possibly because they have a conflict with one application or maybe two applications, right? And then also their inability to possibly participate in either of the voting processes moving forward, which may reduce us down of the voting standard. So I think it's extremely applicable to this group. So I think we probably need to work through that with some firm guidance so that we don't have any problems.
Yeah, I would second that because I'm looking at this list and there are 4 organizations probably where I either have a personal relationship or a working relationship or both. So I would need some clear guidance if I can't participate in it. I would recuse myself from discussion of those, but if I can't be involved in the process.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way the rubric is designed, you're scoring each application based on its own merits at first, right?
Right.
So you're not scoring it against others, you're not ranking it against others, right? So I think it makes sense that we would recuse ourselves from ones where we have a conflict, that we would score the other ones where we don't have a conflict, and then look at the scores overall and see which ones move forward, right? They wouldn't be penalized because someone had to remove themselves, right? But I don't know. Am I absorbing this information correctly?
Yeah.
Does that seem right?
To that, we may want to consider removing information applications. They may help us to identify people, right? So I know when I used to do scoring for the advanced placement program, whenever we got tests, they never had names on them. We never knew where they were from. They were literally numbered. Well, so we could try to do something like that. And then also just to Jason's point about the final vote, we need a quorum of 7. So it may have to be a little bit of work to sort of group applications in a way where there's 7.
But wouldn't the person just abstain
From that vote.
from that?
Vote.
Yeah.
But
And
the point
But they'd still be-
but the challenge then becomes, as Jason was saying, say for example, we need 7. Say Jan has to recuse, Sharena has to recuse. If there could be a scenario where we might not get the votes. We might not have the votes to pass. Right. So I do think that that's something we have to try to think through. And I don't know if maybe doing some work where we sort of taught the commissioners, at this point, maybe as we go along the process and we go through the first round, which is going to be applications that are just not complete, right? If the application is not complete, it can't move forward to the next process. And then as we score, right. So we may have to, just have to figure out,
But with the blind, like you said, I think that was a solution if you just do it blind and,
How many commissioners have seen the applications or any of the applications already?
I've seen the
just
names.
us.
Yeah.
And I think some of the applications have the organization named in them.
Yeah, it's like.
So you probably would still be able to identify the organizations.
Yeah.
I think
So
But
let me just ask a quick question. I want to go back to Jason's idea of taking an application and working through the full process, from beginning to end a little bit. So, question, will this grant committee evaluate every single application? Will all of you see every single application? Okay, so this is what I'm thinking. So let's say that you're divided into groups of 3s, right? And so the 3 of us, we're evaluating a set. So here's somebody in this group that has knows an
We would
applicant.
make sure beforehand that nobody in the group.
Yeah, I think beforehand we would vet them.
Yeah, because what I
Or we
was
would vet
thinking,
them so
you
you
just
wouldn't
would
get that
remove
in your group.
yourself from that group and trade off with somebody from another group. I mean, there's a lot of different ways it could be done. Without having to put 92 applications before every single person in the group. And I really think,
That's not how we were gonna do it.
yeah, well, that's why I was asking how you were gonna do it. But I think your comment is a real valid comment, Caitlin, because initially you're evaluating each application in and of itself based on this rubric. You're not comparing it against any other application. You're just looking at that particular application. So that would be the first step, right?
Yeah, I think that seems pretty clear. But then it's like, what are we gonna do next and how can we be involved if we do have a conflict overall? As we get into the next phase of review, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think the next question is.
So can I go back and to your point, Commissioner Zayed? You said that everyone on this committee will not review all the applications. So walk me through exactly how
That is
this is gonna
correct.
work.
So let's say we have, so let's just say each person gets 11 to 12 applicants. We would already have went through a process to determine what the conflicts of interest are. So every applicant that Commissioner Adams received will be someone that he has already, spoke that he doesn't have that conflict of interest with. So these are people that he can evaluate free and clear. And that would be the same for every person.
Who's gonna do that? Who's gonna do that screening?
We have we have a conflict of interest form that we're putting together. I can show you the questions that we're going to use and the language to see, but it's like questions like, are you, second. So it'd be like names, so it's like university settlement, university settlement, are you closely affiliated, family member, acquaintance, or relationship, I have none. So John may have none, but me, I'm closely affiliated, so I work there. So I cannot, review that, but John, since he said no, he would be able to, we're gonna do this with you.
Gotcha,
Do
okay.
you think that would?
So I would define some of these terms, right? So what is closely affiliated means versus whether it's acquaintance, relationship, meaning does that mean a friend? Does that mean somebody I
This
know?
is like some definitions I thought about, like taking.
You get what I'm saying? So
What is
that's
that?
this is what let's just
Sarah.
say I work for CPC. And CPC
I have the,
files a
I
grant,
think
right?
it's in process.
Pie
Isn't it up
chart?
through
And
Sarah?
I see that they put it in a form, right?
Is this it?
And then the
Yeah, the
folder,
window. Kind of late.
people name like this.
Is it
Increase the chances. So
No, you're right. Wait,
Oh.
if there is
Here,
somebody.
I'll see
This
if
is
I've got it right
different. We
here.
could like form it.
I've got it.
Yeah, that's it.
if you want to do it, then you
I got it
But
right.
additional
Oh,
this
this
is
is
from
from
that line.
Okay, so I get it. This is like something that has staff do it internally as well. That could be helpful.
Maybe we could like merge.
Yeah, exactly. Here, actually. So I think what Sharena is proposing with, some blend,
Basically, merge those questions with this, with those.
I think
It'll be a little more.
I think they just need
more clarity around like what is considered a friendship and those type of relationships.
Yeah, so and that's a very valid question. And there's not a legal definition for it, right? So the ethics law does not go as far to say friend, right? And honestly, particularly to avoid this conversation, right? To not have to define and go back and forth over what that is and what it isn't, right? I think the goal is to identify the things that we can concretely identify, like we can concretely identify whether somebody is your brother or whether it's somebody, that you're married to or not married to. So the legal standard doesn't go that far, right? And I think that's where it gets to a territory where you as a committee or as a commission, you know, will need to decide or just go ahead and just make a judgment call on where the line is going to be. You know, but I think you're fine so long as you're not otherwise reviewing or acting in a way that's going to benefit an organization that you're affiliated with or a relative is affiliated with, right? I mean, you know, and I think that I don't want you to overthink it either, right? Because you'll create all types of new problems for yourself by overthinking, right? And so, you know, I think there's a clear minimum standard here, right? And then, you know, it's about just drawing the line on anything, you know, beyond that. But in terms of, and also too, I want to address this piece too that you guys mentioned earlier, which is with respect to quorum and recusal and those types of things that may ultimately happen. Some of it is just the reality of being a public body, which is if so many people have to recuse themselves, you just don't have the numbers to do business, you know, and in some way, shape, or form, that just may be the outcome, right? That if that many people need, because if you can't have 7 or whatever quorum is necessary to be able to move this, then you just don't have it, right? I mean, I don't know how else to really kind of go about that, right? I mean, and I don't know. I mean, do you really think that there's a scenario where there's going to be 6 of you that will need to recuse yourself on the same matter?
I don't think so, but do you think it would be,
In the committee.
do you think that, maybe all commissioners should complete this conflict of interest form?
Yes, absolutely.
And then, you know, they'll have their list, so when the votes come, they can just abstain from that vote of discussion. Or not.
It's possible that we might, depending on the scenario, we might need them. Like we might need another commissioner to step in.
I mean, if we're in front of the full body and everybody knows what their conflict is, they can just like take themselves out for that.
Although, would we not be sort of presenting the full commission with a slate of X number of?
We will probably have to.
It's not like-
individually.
Well,
I know, yeah, it might be a lot.
Is it a conflict if it's a bulk vote? So if they're submitting 30 organizations, right, for the final list of grantees and Sharena's place of employment is on there, even if she didn't have anything to do with that process to get that on there, does she still have to recuse herself from the massive vote there since it's a block vote on the entire grant package of $1.2 million? And her vote can't possibly in any way by herself impact that. I mean, I don't know. Is that?
I would err on the side of caution and say
yes.
yes. She's still acting as a public official and voting to spend money with her organization.
So any commissioner who at the end of the day has that, sees someone on that list when it gets there, that is what needs to be done. Right?
I mean,
So, okay.
We may have to, it might be like painstaking work, but it might be, we may be in a scenario where we will have to create a spreadsheet of all the grants that we want to approve. And we might have to have every commissioner go through that sheet. We might have to count the votes literally and be like, we have this many for this or this many for that. And then we can determine if we can group, like we might be able to group some of the grants and then we can do a block vote for some grants, but then we may have to do individual votes for other grants. I think we just have to kind of just do the data and get the numbers and see what we have because we just don't know until we ask.
I also think that there might be, based on like what we're finding out tonight in signing this, there might be more grants that there are no conflict of interest on as well. And so I think that's another thing I think we're thinking about those situations where it's like someone's employment or a family member, but I think out of 93 grants, I think we should be okay. I don't think we should ever not be in quorum because it might end up being that there are commissioners who don't have a conflict of interest with any organization that's on the list. based on the definitions that we found out about.
Is there a plan to, so I know there's different categories of topics or areas in the charter that the grants are supposed to go to. Have you guys decided or discussed or otherwise, made a choice for a certain number of grants to go to certain areas or certain dollar amounts, or is it just kind of you're evaluating projects as a whole? And the reason why I'm asking is because if there's going to be a scenario where you're going to say, hey, we're going to fund 10 mediation programs, we're going to fund, 5 of these, or if you start putting that type of number to it, then I see a higher risk of acting on other entities, right? So for example, if it's like, hey, I know we're only going to do one, $25,000 grant, and I know my organization, only 2 organizations put in the $25,000 grant, right? And one of the organizations is mine. Well, I might rank that one lower, or rank the other one lower, so that mine gets some preferential treatment. Okay. So long as that's not a concern,
And I think
I don't think there's going to be an issue.
I think like where we are is we want to make sure, one, that we just have all completed grant applications before we review anything. So if they're not complete, then they can't get reviewed. So then I think we want to score them. And I then think from there, I think once we get deeper in the process, I think that's when we have to start thinking about we don't want all the grants in one place. But I don't think we're using that as a filter in the early part of the process. We want to serve the whole city. But we also have to work with what we have. So we want to select these grants based on the impact that we think they'll have. But I think as we get deeper into it, we'll have to consider are we covering different parts of the city and things like that. But I think our priority is to get the best applications and grants that are out there first.
Have we created just initially a process to even start with reviewing the grants, like of how we're going to divvy it up amongst commissioners? Have we even gotten that far at all?
That was what we were talking
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
That's-
I need some papers.
Do you need an agenda?
I was like, I don't even know where. Could somebody here share with me an agenda?
So at the onset, before commissioners even get the applications, so we're saying that they're compiled and the staff is going to do the first level of review to say, hey, these are complete, these are not complete, and then pass them along. So and if that's the case too, then in addition to the commission, then you may also want to have the staff as well, or anybody who's going to have hands on this, also make sure that everyone is disclosing any potential conflicts.
So to the chair, it sounds like before we move forward with any grants, and I'll tell the staff to hold everything where it's at until we have guidance on specifically the conflict of interest piece that is sent over and vetted. Is that sounding what you would like to do at this point?
I want to make sure that all of our I's are dotted and all of our T's are crossed and that we are in full compliance. So I think, we don't want to rush. We want to do it right. So I would want to make sure that's all kind of clear before we move forward.
Okay.
Yeah, so what I would recommend kind of in closing then is, develop your process inclusive of the conflict of interest form, whatever, what you want that to say, how expansive or inclusive you want it to be, right? Design or spell out the entire process from start to finish, right? Like put pen to paper on all of it. I'm happy to review that and take a look, and I know we got to move quick, so I will make sure that gets prioritized. Yeah, I can forward that. Again, so I think what I typically have had people do, so depending on the situation, right? So sometimes, like I'll say, disclose your conflicts to your director, right? In this particular case, it could be the committee chair. If you want me to have a record of it, you can CC me on it as well, just so that somebody else has a copy of it, or can weigh in. So, but whatever it is you want the process to be, to signal disclosure, is totally fine, long as there is a disclosure and it can be tracked. But so I think if you guys just put pen to paper on the entire process from start to finish, between myself and Stephanie, we will turn it right back around and let you know if there's any holes or pitfalls or anything else that needs to be considered.
Any other questions comments? Anything else from you?
No, I mean, just those are the main things. I think the only other thing that I would add, these are the things that I hope should go without saying, but I will say them because it never always just goes without saying. And that is, don't take bribes. It's a thing. It's a thing, right? There may be people or individuals who will, who may want, who may want a proposition and say, hey, I want my grant to go through, or can you get me a higher amount, right? So just be mindful of that. I would be, one of the things that I advised all of our department directors when we were dealing with ARPA funding is just, especially as the process is underway, avoiding even the conversations with applicants, right? I mean, develop whatever the boilerplate response is going to be, or have the staff or direct the staff to kind of, respond to inquiries, or, you will have people who will say, hey, what is, what's the status of my application, or can I submit something extra, or, those types of things. Just make sure you have a standard, you're applying it consistently and evenly across the board. Like I said, the gifts, things like that, illegal to solicit or accept. So not even just accepting, but also soliciting as well. What else? Avoiding, and just always being mindful of just avoiding the appearance of impropriety. So even if you don't necessarily have a hard, fast rule on something, right? I mean, I always encourage, public officials and employees to hold ourselves above board, and always be mindful of, how do you want this headline to read? Right. I mean, and I think in this group, we're all familiar now with headlines and the impact that they can have, regardless of whether or not the content is accurate. Right. And so just think about that. What do you want this headline? Like, whenever you're about to do something, think, am I okay with what the headline is going to read when somebody finds out about this? Because they will. They absolutely will. All right. Any other questions for me?
I can wait till public comment.
Yeah, we just gotta wait.
If it's for me, I can just answer it on the side because I won't be staying. I got to go vote by 7:30. So.
Okay,
So,
I mean, I'm gonna get there, but.
So I just wanted to say, I've served on 2 county boards, and every year in January, we had to fill out a conflict of interest statement and say, if we served on any other boards. And that way it was known at the beginning of the year before we voted on $25 million in HUD funding later, right? And that way it's already out there and known at the beginning of the year before you get into this kind of a situation, right? So I think that's something the commission should consider, right? As like, if they have a conflict, if they're serving on a board, or, where they work, things like that. That way they're not making decisions later. And I just really wish that this conversation would have happened.
Okay, so I'm gonna wait till public comment, and whatever the conversation you have with Delonte, I would want that to happen so that we can move our business forward, because we are like barely on schedule right now. But we will have public comment at 7:30.
Thanks, Monte.
Thank you.
All right, see you guys.
Okay, so, I guess the next item of business that we would want to look at is kind of getting into some of these nuts and bolts, which is, I think, just basic questions like, we've had these conversations, I think, informally on the phone, but not in actually a full meeting. So it would be, full attention, please. It would be, who's gonna review the, applications, how many applications we will review. And I think we can start there, and I think that we can then come up with sort of this, this process that Delonte was mentioning. So I would want to open that up to who and how many to start.
So I was thinking that, so everyone on the committee and the staff that's been assisting in this process, like 7.
That's 5, 7.
Yeah, and then we'll divide that up evenly between us and the number of applicants. And anyone that's identified of having a conflict of interest with the organization, we will exclude them from our list.
Commissioner Van Leer?
I would say that makes sense to me. We want to check with the directors.
To the chair, I would prefer that staff only do logistical work. So I do not want staff to do any scoring on the rubric. We can pre-screen based on criteria like, are all the things present? Is it, there's 2 questions on your rubric. The first part, we'd be happy, are they violence prevention, restorative justice, or mediation, yes or no? And does the grant align with CPC's mission and values? We can even do that, or however you want. But I would prefer actually the second one we don't even do. The first one though, if they don't mention violence prevention, restorative justice, or mediation, that's kind of a turnkey thing that makes it easy to eliminate. So is it complete? And then that first rubric row, staff would be willing to help you, move through them quickly in that way. And then whatever's left there, you can take it over from there.
So maybe we can just get 2 commissioners from, maybe to volunteer. Okay.
Commissioner Garrett-Ferguson?
I was gonna say, if there is a way that I agree with Jason, no staff, just keep it from their hands altogether, because I think that including them is not conducive to what our job is, but also can we have to increase capacity if we need additional commissioners? Can we have it be fair when we open it up maybe at the next all commission meeting and say, hey, we could use some additional support. Does anyone want to help? So that or email, but just something where that we can put out for all the commissioners. But I think it is the work of the commission, as what Charter 115 says, that we do the grant. So I think that staff has done amazing with helping us get to this point. But I think at this point, even just a preliminary scan, I think that should just be only commissioners moving forward in the reviewing of all grants.
The other thing I wanted to also mention is that, so even if, so I think we have to pick if we want to do the first 2 questions with the staff or not. That's something that we should talk about. But let's say we get all of the applications for the first 2 questions, that 93 number is going to decrease, right? So we might be, as a committee, we might be able to take it on and not need to add other people. So I would maybe not recommend not putting the cart before the horse on that and just getting all the applications through the first 2 questions and then see how many we actually have to fully review and score.
That's a good idea.
The other thing is we've seen the applications now. Maybe I haven't looked at all of them, but they're actually not that long, right? It's not like we're looking at 15-page, 10-page applications. I mean, the application itself is kind of short. And then, we're looking for, some support letters. The support letters don't, from what I've just looked at as some things have come in, they're not very long. The budget, some of the budgets are more detailed and itemized than others. So I think that this committee could do it. I wasn't sure in the beginning because I wasn't certain about sort of how long the applications would be, but I think that the 5 people on this committee could probably do it. And I also think, the 5 of us have kind of like been together like this whole time. And so we kind of started this together. We had 2 additional people in the beginning. And I think that, we kind of owe it to ourselves as a committee to kind of finish the job that we started as well. So if I thought it was too heavy of a workload, I wouldn't say that. But I think that we can actually do it. I think we can get them done.
Yeah, that all sounds good to me. I do think, keeping the staff to just not even the questions, but like, is the grant complete? Just make sure I think that would be super helpful if the staff could do that. And then I don't disagree with, I think I agree with it, we can do the work. If it turns out some reason we can't, then we can reach out.
I was gonna put my name, throw my hat.
So, yeah. so
Like,
I think-
of course, we weren't there,
But-
but if there's
excuse me.
any additional
Sorry.
assistance, I'll throw my name in the ring as well.
I'm sorry, I just was trying to complete a thought, but I do think that to the point of like opening up to everybody, I think that would be a moment just, to seek broadly, and, if you're available, great, but I think the process we're talking about, we just need to say what we're gonna do. So it sounds like we're saying, staff will just make sure the applications are complete starting Friday, right? That's the deadline for follow-up from people who didn't submit everything. And then once that's done, we look at the list, we identify conflicts, we fill out a form, which I think this is not exactly the form we need. We have to do something a little bit different. And then we fill that form out and we kind of mark those conflicts and divide it up in a way that at least the first round is not going to be, there won't be conflict there because we're just scoring. Then the next step is the interviews, and we're all going to be doing these interviews with the ones we reviewed. So yeah, are we going to overlap? Is there going to be any overlap? Like, do each of us do just everybody does one and nobody does duplicates, or are we going to want 2 people reviewing each one? That's another question.
My preference was to have 2 people to look at each application. And also, so that would be my preference. But clearly we're committee, so we have to make that decision as a committee. And then I also wanted to ask, as we go through the process, so we eliminate, the staff will eliminate, then we identify conflicts, divide based on the conflicts, then we score. So my question then to the committee is the idea that does everyone who makes it through to the scoring, do they automatically get an interview? Is that what we're agreeing to? That if you have completed an application, your application gets scored, are we saying that everyone who gets scored automatically gets an interview, irrespective of the score on the application?
So I think in the past, and I think we could talk about it, but it would be if they have a certain amount of points.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
So I think we can decide, like, add up all of the points, like what is the total possible points, like if it's 20 or if it's 25, and say, I don't know, everybody with like 15 or more points automatically gets the interview. People who don't, I think, but we can decide that, but I think we have to probably add up all the points to know what the total amount of points
There's
would be.
28 total points on the scoring rubric right now.
So I think if I could propose, I would probably propose anyone that had at least 15, because I think this is community that could get interviewed, but I think we can open it up for discussion and see how others feel.
I think another thing to think about too is, depending on how many categories we end up with, if they get a certain number of, obviously the disqualification, right? If they get a 1 on anything, they're disqualified. If that's the way I'm reading this now, but we have to make decisions, that seems to make sense. So that way also, they could get a lot of other points above
What, a rubric?
Wait, how did they,
Well,
you
it
said they
says,
could get other points?
well, it says in the fourth column where you get 1 point.
Do you think it's just for up here?
I think it's just for up there.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right.
That's the
But
one
so,
for the-
right, I'm sorry, I misread this. But the point is still like, if they get a lot of points in some areas, but they get 1 point in other areas, would that be a?
No, it's just the
I'm
total.
I'm making a suggestion, I'm just raising an issue, we don't have to argue about, but just like, I'm just asking a question, like,
No, I'm trying to understand.
yeah, so I'm just saying, if for example, they get, in 1, 2, 3, and 4, they get 4 points, but in 5, 6, 7, 8, they get 1 point. Like, is there some threshold of certain categories where they don't meet any really the basic standard that would disqualify them? And that's kind of a question.
Like they may actually get the point total, but then there may be a couple areas where they
Are
got
they too weak in
1
certain
point.
areas?
1 point is like, right, they got technically the point threshold, but there are these areas that there are real concerns about.
Yeah, so it's just like, I think we should think about that, like, I don't know.
Something like that.
And what would that standard be?
Okay, so we have a process, we're gonna get this process in place, but I also think we also have to look at like everything as a whole, right? I think that's kind of like your point about the interview. So then maybe for those people, if they meet the point threshold, then that would be when the interview would come in, right? That would be when the interview would come in, and then we would get to ask them very specific questions about these areas of their application. So we can say, you're very strong in this area, you're very strong in this area, but we have a concern in this area. Can you elaborate about these 2 areas that you score really poorly in, right? I think that was your whole idea behind the interview, and making sure that people who don't have professional grant writers, people who don't, do this all the time for a living, that they have an opportunity that is equal to people who have experience in it.
That makes sense to me, yeah.
Can we also have like standard questions for the interview? Because I also don't want us to lean so heavily into that we then are just not using the best judgment and giving community money away because we want to be helpful. So I just want to make, like, can there still be a standard that we are utilizing for the interview?
I think
questions?
like before you came in, that was something that Commissioner Zayed had mentioned, that she's been working on this behind the scenes a lot, and they are currently she's working with staff to come up with like those standard questions.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could email that maybe to the committee, and then we can all kind of like look and see where you are, and then if there is something that we want to provide a suggestion for, then we can do that. But I would direct that through Commissioner Zayed, because she has already been working on it already with the staff.
Okay, yeah, just making sure everybody's asked the same question.
Commissioner Kennedy.
For the point rubrics, so we're gonna have at least 2 people score each application. I just wanted to confirm that we're saying that both people would need to give the applicant a minimum of 15 points. You know what I'm saying?
I would
Or
be
just
okay
one
with
person?
average.
Oh,
I think
average.
we average the scores.
Oh.
I don't think that would be fair. I think it has to be consistency. I think from sitting on other community grant making boards, yes, we want to make sure that we're giving the money and we're helping people, but I think we have to be able to make some tough decisions. And so I think we have to be able, because then we can end up with just having all 93 applicants. They just end up just funding everyone, and there's no standard. I mean, we can, but I'm just saying, like, we want to make sure that we have something in place that's like actually structured. And so I would think that it's not an average, but at both people. Because that's like if one person says 3 and the other person was like 12. That's not fair.
But what if one says 16 and one says 14?
Yeah, but
I'm just
there's
saying,
so
they
much
both
of a
don't-
variation. Because we can have like one person says 12 and one person has 2. So we still would be like, oh, okay, well, maybe.
We're not gonna add the points together. Like, so for example, we would say if one person gave a score of like that scenario, 16 and 14, averaging is 15.
Yes.
So I'm not talking about like adding the points up.
So Chair Adam, so if there's a big discrepancy between 3 and 12, that means there's not consistency in our rubric. And if it's that huge, 3 and 12, right? That's a huge gap, right? So I think that needs to be discussion with the commissioners if it's that huge. Now, if it's 14, 15, there might be some differences, right? But 3 and 12, that's huge, right? So I would think overall that should not be the case.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes. I mean, I think in the end, as long as we are, just being open and transparent with each other, I think we can figure out a third person needs to score to see sort of like where, I mean, we can figure out what we need to do in order to be fair to the applicants. I think that's the most important thing, is that we are putting our best foot forward to ensure that we are being fair to everyone who's applied for grants. I think that's the most important thing. And like we've been saying this from the very beginning, this is our first year doing this. The previous commission did not have grant awarding abilities. And so, we've gotten this far, but we're still, even though we're like this far along in the process, I feel like at this point, we're still kind of learning some things about this as well. So I think as long as we are going to make the adjustments that we need to make sure that we are honoring the commitment to the community and doing this in a fair way, I think we'll just have to figure some things out still along the way.
I think if that's the case, then can we define terms in the grants? Because just from being on other community grants, like it happens more than not, because when we're using terms like measurable and substantial, but we don't even have definition. So what I think is measurable and a substantial in a grant can be completely different than what somebody else thinks is measurable and substantial. So it's like some of the stuff on this rubric is still very subjective. It's not objective. It's like anytime that we have something that is as subjective as this, it opens up an opportunity to have large discrepancies, because we're all coming into this with a different amount of experience from a different background. And so I think that it is very likely that people can score and have these very differentiations because of how people are defining what that means to them and what their background is if they've done grant reviewing before. Because like when I hear measurable, I think of SMART goals. Somebody else could see it and be like, oh, this is clearly, you can measure this. And I'm like, I don't think this is measurable because it's not using SMART goals. And that was the standard that I come in through community grant making. So that's my biggest concern with that, because on the rubric, this is a completely subjective. What you think is vague can be different than what I think is vague.
Yeah, so I do agree with that, but I also believe that, there is a difference if we're sitting on a foundation. There's a difference. So even working with an organization like Neighborhood Connections, the way they process their grants is completely different. So I think it's being mindful of the space. And that's not saying that we're going to diminish quality. I think it's important to understand that this may be grassroots organizations, right? So hopefully that they have some help and assistance. And like we said, that hopefully that interview will provide more substance. So I do think that it's imperative that we're ensuring that we're meeting measures, but this isn't the Cleveland Foundation, right? And that's no shade to anybody, right? But I think it's being intentional, right? So if there needs some assistance, of course we can tell them maybe in the future I would recommend this, right? But I think we have to be mindful of, how we want to be good stewards of tax dollars, but we want to be mindful of our target population is what I would want to say too.
Yeah, I just think even in being mindful of our target population, we have to make sure we're not squandering city money. Because no, we're not a big foundation.
Yeah.
But I think without having clearly defined terms in our rubric and our process, it also, I think, leaves it up to people to also be able to make allegations around favoritism and things of that nature as well, because there's no standard. So I think it's also a way for us to cover ourselves, because it's like if everything is like, oh, it's grassroots, and there's no standard. And I think just because something is grassroots doesn't mean it has to be, it doesn't have to have like a standardization to it. But I think if you're always going off of just like the intent or the feeling behind something without something actually having some type of standardization, then a person can say, oh, well, they're doing this because they felt that way, but they really didn't deserve it, because we still are accountable for these dollars after the fact. So that's why, like, even just us just defining those terms so that we're on the same page is helpful.
So, Chair, when was this rubric sent out to us? Do you remember the date?
This rubric has been, we drafted this rubric when Cole-Rodriguez was still chair when we drafted this rubric.
Is that accurate, Ryan?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
several months ago, yes.
Okay, I just wonder why these.
So this is why, I sent the rubric out to the full committee because I wanted to, get feedback on it, but,
Remember, we had it in our emails, right?
right, it was always there, but then I sent it out, I don't remember, it was some weeks ago but I knew that we needed
For
to
us to
review.
send feedback,
Right.
correct? Okay.
Well, I think it's important. So I think it's important that we are all on the same page because when we grade, we want it to be similar. So I do think it's important that that there is. So I want to highlight your point that it is measurable and that because we're gonna have the MOU, right? So we are still ensuring that we are good stewards of the money because we have the MOU. So we have different checkpoints, right? That's gonna occur, right? But we want to ensure as a committee that when you're grading it, that there is not 3 and 12, right? That's not going to look good as a commission. So overall, as a committee, we should have a clear understanding of this rubric. So when that grading comes or those points are given, we can ensure a fairness, right?
What I would say is I hear Commissioner Garrett-Ferguson's point. So I think what we need essentially, like I'm going through here, I think there's some language here that I think to a point well taken that can be interpreted in the way that each commissioner chooses to interpret it, and there is danger in that as well, right? So I think maybe what we need to do is I've highlighted my rubric, and that as I'm listening to the conversation, and I'm willing to take the lead on it to basically break down all of these terms in the different parts of the rubric, and then I can send it out to the committee, and we can decide as a group if we agree with this is what a measurable outcome is, this is what we believe is clearly stated, this is what we believe is concisely stated. Like I can go through, I'm willing to go through, start that document to help us get on the same page before we start reviewing. But I think that's a document we would probably need internally for ourselves. And then I think that the concerns are well taken. And I'm glad that we got that caution. But I think that we can probably do something like that to make sure that we don't have 3 and 12, right?
I just want to make one comment, and that is that when this process started, you advertised it in such a way that grassroots organizations that may never have applied for a grant before or whatever, you were encouraging these organizations to apply. Because of that, this one, the very number 4 is a little bit of a concern. Does the group or organization have a strong track record of success? Because it may be the very first time they've ever applied for a grant. And that one has a real high, when you start looking at the scores on that one, I do think that you just need to be cognizant of the fact that we did this for, part of the appeal was to reach out to grassroots organizations that may never have applied for a grant before. So it's just things like that, Chair Adams, that, you just probably need to, when you start running it through an application through this rubric, you're just aware of what that means for grassroots organizations that may have never applied before.
I think I'm sorry. I think that's a good point. And maybe there's a way to create 1 or 2 other measures that provide some weight. So like, I don't know what if it would be specifically grassroots, like this is a grassroots organization, or this is new and innovative and really centered in the community. And we could figure out the language, but creating some other categories that, because a lot of this is weighted toward groups that might be more established. So that might be a good way to
What I'm thinking, listening to both of you, is just 4A, 4B. 4A applies to an organization that's already established, and so then this would apply to them, and then 4B would be for an organization, a grassroots organization who may be new, and then that way, a grassroots organization won't be punished because they're not already established. So I think we can maybe, and like I said, I'm taking notes here. I think we can do a 4A, 4B, and then that way you'll score the part of number 4 that is applicable to that organization.
And that's what I spoke to earlier about having a section for grassroots organizations, not doing calculations that I can see.
So do we need to create a question, a 4B question? That
So this would be, yeah, I think.
That
It could be
would,
4A, and then we would just have to do a 4B, which would be for those organizations that are, maybe newer grassroots or.
what would we root the question in? And so that it is fair and applicable for the 4A question. That's just kind of what I'm asking, like, what would be the,
I was thinking
context.
something like the need that it's addressing, maybe like the potential for success, maybe something in that, and something like that. Yeah, Ryan says innovation. I was thinking in those areas.
okay,
So, I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah.
I really like innovation for 4B.
Can this be sort of a work group? Like, sure, I don't know,
It's
we're
gonna,
getting good
it's gonna,
input,
it's gonna
but
have to be a quick turnover. We're gonna have to get to work tomorrow.
Sharena, I mean, the two of you have been talking about this a lot.
Yeah, okay, so Sharena.
And to Sharena's point, I do think that grassroots organizations should take the priority. So if there's also a way that that could be incorporated to, if there's like a way to prioritize them within the rubric scoring, that's something that I would definitely support.
How are we defining grassroots? And I only say that because just in looking at the list, there are a lot of organizations that are grassroots, but they have established fiscal agents or established grant writers that are associated to these grants. And you can clearly see that from just looking at the list quickly. And so I also want us to also be mindful of how we are a philanthropic city. There are so many community grants in this city. So even as we are talking about grassroots, at this table, do we have a unified definition of what a grassroots organization is? Because I think some of this is really hard to like put certain things hard and fast of what we're going to do, because so many things have not been clearly defined for the committee as a whole. So I hear you that like you're working on it with staff, but that's not very helpful when we have a committee meeting and we're being told to make decisions and all of this information has not been forthcoming to everyone that's on the committee. It's hard to make that decision. And so what I think is a grassroots organization may be that, oh, they don't have any help from an established nonprofit that is a known nonprofit that gets grants to the city. Or I might say that somebody else would say, oh, I think the grassroots organization is a small group that just has a fiscal agent. But they also have an established grant writer. So I think that we need to, before we can really make decisions tonight, where there are so many conversations and decisions being made behind the scenes, it doesn't create a forthcoming process that as a committee and as a whole, that we're actually making decisions that make sense, because so much is happening behind the scenes and it's not a transparent process. And if that is how we're moving forward, just in this initial start of it, then it isn't. So please do not cut me off, because I would like to continue my thoughts and my words, and I am only addressing the chair at this moment and the full committee. So I would appreciate if no one cuts me off while I'm speaking, because I do not cut others off. Thank you. So as I will continue, I think that when there is so much work being done behind the scenes, it does not create a transparent process. And then we come to a meeting, we haven't had a meeting in a couple of weeks, and we're being asked to make decisions, and there's not unified definition. So how are we going to be able to make those? Because we all, again, diverse group of people, cover different backgrounds, love grassroots, done it a million times. That is my title at my job. But some people would not consider me a grassroots because of where I work. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think we have to have a unified definition for these terms, and all of the work that has been done behind the scenes in regards to these grants needs to be forthcoming, so that when we have a meeting, we have all the information we need to make the best decisions and make the best votes and put the right motions on the table.
I think I can add that to the list of the terms that we will define from the rubric, and I will add grassroots on there. And I agree. So I think that the more clarity, the better.
Yeah. So if I can, I would just like to add a point of clarification. So you know that there's work groups. So especially because we're live, so there's not work going on behind the scenes. That's not, we have a work group to kind of work out certain details, and we always encourage others to join work groups. So if there's anything you want to add, I will always encourage to join a work group.
There's a budget work group. When do they meet and
So I'm
where is
not
that
over that.
posted?
But like for the application, there was a work group, and I think they're gonna take the rubric and the interview. So I'm not the chair, so I can't formally answer that, but just so we are aware, because we're all on live stream, so I just wanted to put that in the focus.
Yes, and since we're on camera, I also just want to know, when on camera did we actually formalize a work group for the budget committee? Because since we've been talking about work groups, I just don't remember. So that's for applications, because I know we had one in the past for like the forming of the application, but not for this type of rubric and stuff. So that's why I'm just curious to know when did that
The
happen.
people who were working in that work group initially just continued to do work.
So, but was that made aware to the full committee that they were continuing to do work? Was that
I mean, I
before?
thought that everyone on the committee knew that Piet and Sharena were doing, were in a work group on the budgeting grants.
Where was that list? Where was that information put? It was that in the email? Was that said on camera at a previous meeting? I'm just asking, like, where was that information?
Yeah, it was during a meeting a while ago.
And that they were continuing?
Yeah, we discuss it almost every meeting. Yeah.
But we haven't had a meeting in a while, so that's why I'm asking.
Well, every meeting we've had since then, we discussed what we can do on the work.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to join in, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I would like to know, because I never,
So I think-
only time I knew there was a work group was when it was initially to start creating the applications, not to start looking at the rubric process, not that there was a work group that was looking at definitions. That's the first that I've ever heard that we were trying to.
No. All
That's what
that
you
stuff
said.
just sort of arose today. That's not what they were working on.
Oh,
So
that
the
was
stuff that we're talking
Commissioner
about
Zayed said that just now. She cut me off and said that we
She's
were
working, she's been
on
doing,
creating definitions.
everybody, just
Point of order.
just some order, please.
If we can
So-
roll the tape back, she said
Okay.
we are working on a unified definition for.
All right, so what we need to do at this point,
Please do not address
Okay, so
me
everyone-
directly.
ladies,
Please don't get in my
Order,
face.
please.
You want to get in my face? Are you getting in my face on camera? You know what? All right, because I think they harassed. I think that when you gesture to somebody.
okay, so
Yes, and I
I'll
think
have
that that's
a
a very
gavel.
threatening gesture.
ladies,
So that's you're making very
Ladies,
threatening
ladies.
gestures towards
Okay,
me, and I do not
listen.
appreciate that.
listen,
So, yeah,
we have to get this work done.
we do.
We
And I
have to,
have
so
questions.
listen, so just please stop talking. What we should do, because we cannot have a quorum of our committee in a work group. Why don't you and I just form a separate work group to work on some of these things, because we can't all work together in the same work group. That's like a quorum of the committee. So why don't you and I work on the stuff that you've identified, which are the defining the grassroots in a way. We can go through the rubric and we can define these things, which are the things that you've actually identified. And I think that we can have the two work groups that are working, doing a little bit of different work, but also forwarding the work of the committee forward. I don't think there's a conflict there. I just want, our committee to continue to move this commission's work forward. In the end, that is what we're here to do. So, we've done a great job of doing that thus far, and we should continue to do that. We cannot have, this type of thing happen right when we're on the cusp of getting to the end of this. So yeah, it's a little stressful. The devil's always in the details. So like, it's easier, this reminds me of when I was writing my dissertation, and it was easy to write it. And then at the end, everything has to be done right. Like right at the end, like you can't save something till later. We're at the point where we can't save things till later. Like they have to kind of get flushed out. And that's can be a little high stress at times. But I just would really love it if we could we'll form this work group. You've been doing really good work for this committee. I would like for you to continue doing that. But I do believe that these other areas that have been identified by Commissioner Garrett-Ferguson, we do need to do them as well. And I just hope you don't feel like an affront or anything.
They haven't just been identified, they're on a to-do list to do, and there's two people doing it. She has had more than enough time to do work. She comes to meetings ill-prepared, and then wants to throw out allegations at the very last minute, that every part of the situation has been transparent. Every part of the whole process has been transparent. Sorry that everyone else knew what was going on and she did not. I don't have anything to do with that.
Well,
So
what
again,
I,
I just did a quick search in my actual email. And there is no email that I actually received from the rubric until you sent me that rubric on August 1st. So that was the first time that I ever seen the rubric. And in my email, there also was no mention of ever there being a work group or anything of that mention in my email. So any of this stuff that was going on beforehand, I don't know if there was an intentional to just not notify me, but I actually was not notified. I don't even have most of emails from budgeting grants. That's one of the committees that I have very few emails from, and all of them have been from you. So I was not aware. There is no track record on paper that I was ever made aware of these things. Again, these definitions, again, from what was originally said, was there was a work group that was formed around creating the application, which was months ago. You said that has continued with these other things. I'm addressing the fact that there has been other things. The application was completed, but a rubric and definitions, that part was not made transparent to everyone on the committee. And whether or not people have a personal issue with me or not, I am on this committee. And we all have taken an oath. We all have a fiduciary responsibility. So I'm going to raise concerns. And when there is a clear evidence that a person has been intentionally left out of information, I will assert that, because that is a problem. And again, a work group being formed and it has a clear goal, and that is to create an application that does not include the rubric, that does not include these other definitions. And so those are things that I brought up today, that yes, I would like to be a part of that process in helping to move forward, because we have to make sure that we have clear definitions for all of these things, so that there isn't other avenues of favoritism or impropriety with city's money. A lot of these things have been left up, and they're very subjective outcomes. They are not clearly defined. And anytime something is not clearly defined, it leaves room for errors to be made that does not have to be made. And so, looking through, I was not aware of that. I have no problem helping. I'm not ill prepared. I also do not make negative notions and comments and personal vendettas about people. So I would really appreciate if other commissioners did not attack my character, because that's not something that I do. And again, that's a form of harassment and workplace bullying. And that is actually legal terms and legal jargon. And so to bully someone, intimidate them, and say these things on camera is not really fair, because I have never done that to another commissioner. I do not assert those things about them. So I would just appreciate moving forward that we can just keep our comments to the work, because those are the things that I have
can you please stop? Please don't interrupt the
these
commissioners.
comments too.
All right, so to your point, what I will say is, I will apologize if you felt left out of the loop. I know that I was aware that as far back as April, I think is when I was going back and forth home. I know that they were working. I think Adriana was still chair as well when this happened. So I don't know how you got lost in that information, that loop, but I do know that they've been doing this work for, I think, even like maybe up when we had to pass the budget.
Yeah, so I guess
Right.
I'll speak. So when it was initially proposed, I think it was April 10th, and I think there was a formal motion to accept the grant guidelines, which helped to form the application, and a basic rubric was suggested, which was outlined those 7 questions. So I will say, so even the 7 questions, and then it was just more like personalized. Well, it came like points 4, 3, 2. That was clearly defined, right? So that began in April. These 7 questions, which was proposed, but there was not any feedback about that, and that was proposed in email several times, as well as mentioned in the live stream, in the meeting, right? In that motion, it was the application, the rubric, and I think it was something else. So I can't remember because it was April. But that was a former motion that was proposed. And in that meeting, I specifically asked John, did you want to, Cait, because I remember she said she didn't want to. I think you were on the phone. And I think sometimes with the phone, it's hard to hear. So I will say that could have occurred, but I would say there should, we don't want you to feel like that, but you are always welcome to work in a work group. But I think we just wanted to provide clarity that those 7 questions was provided in April.
I checked, I don't have those questions in my email at all. I just don't have them. So I don't know who sent it.
Yeah, so,
Yes, and I printed them in several meetings. I printed them, but I can double check because
When was our last budget and grants meeting before now?
so with me it was I think April 10th.
Okay.
But each meeting I used to bring a folder with the application, with the grant guidelines, the application that was presented by Neighborhood Connections in this rubric. I had like a folder. It was, and I gave it to everybody several times. And in that folder, I had meeting guidelines too.
No, I remember that. I'm saying after the April 10th meeting, when was the next time this committee met?
okay.
Okay, but there was a draft rubric, is what I'm saying, April 10th.
Just a time check, you have 9 minutes, on your time if you want to extend the meeting.
I have the guideline.
I feel like this is not necessarily a good use of our meeting.
So at this point, I think we can figure this part out. We can settle this, but we only have about 7.5 minutes left, so I would like to open the rest up for public comment.
We're right there, you can use that.
This one?
Right on the end.
Oh, yeah. So.
This is actually a combination of all the important points in today's meeting, and plus, it's also an opinions and a suggestion from me and Rosie Pelvey together, since we don't have much time. We have been, both of us, we have been on county boards. So since we know the commissioner here, you are not all served at the same length of the time. And also there will be new commissioner coming in anyway. So it's better to just establish a routine at the beginning of the year. Everybody turn in a form to state if you have any conflict of interest, like how many boards you have served on, where is your current job, that kind of thing. Of course, if you do have a family members, whatever around, that all can be included on that. So in that case, the other routine you can also establish, since right now you will have this grant process every year. I think we should establish the way as when people send it in, since there's a common address created for all the applications, staff, the only thing they need to do is they filter out the ones having incomplete information. Like there are documents they did not include it, which is required. Those things, they can separate them away. Then they put them in sequential numbers, maybe with a year, 2024-01, like that, like a grant 01, grant 02. So you may have all the numbers. So by the time for any of the committees members in the grant, budget and grant committee to review, you don't have to worry about it. It's blind from the beginning. If you worry about having 2 people graded that, with the current format, 28 points will be the maximum from each commissioner. If we want to avoid the huge difference between one is graded as a 40, the other one is graded 10, there's another format you can think about it to adapt. If you want 2 people to read it or 3 people, just add the total score from these people together to divide it by how many people. So each one will have an average score. In that case, later, when you will have to go to vote, lots of the issues will be kind of balanced out. I would suggest 17 points should be the one as a separate line for people to get interviewed. This is, I use the 100 points in general. The 60 points above is considered okay. After below 60 points is an F. If then you want to convert it to the ABCD way of grading. So for 28, 17 is the point to separate that.
So that will decrease the unnecessary workload and worry. Sure, it still may be something you have to worry about because in the future, some of the grants may not be all short and sweet. Some of them could be long. In that case, this kind of basic system will help you out to balance things out better, to have a better start. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lou.
Hi, my name's Rosie Palfy, and just for the record, I'm wearing my Team Jason, Shelley, Ryan, and Sarah t-shirt. I want to thank everybody for their hard work on this, but honestly, I'm underwhelmed. I'm a little disappointed. There's a lot of things it's clear that should have been decided beforehand. I know that you all are, nobody can question how dedicated that you are to the work. All the hours that you guys have spent on everything, training, whatnot, but you were supposed to hire staff to help out with the grants. And so it's really disappointing to hear a commissioner say that they don't want staff to be involved in like some initial position. As far as questions about, excuse me, whether one organization gets 3 points or 12 points, I'm confident that you all would catch that and say, hey, maybe we made a mistake. Let's go back and look at that. You know what I'm saying? And Commissioner Adams got upset because he said I was talking or whatever. I was reacting to some things I thought were ridiculous. And you know what? If you all want to address that, you should have established rules after the June 14th meeting. I am outraged by Commissioner Garrett-Ferguson's behavior. I noticed it in the first couple budget and grants meetings, hostility, and all she had to do was get up and apologize at the last meeting for losing her temper. And so for her to accuse anybody of bullying, threatening behavior, there were people here that saw what happened when the cameras went off on June 14th. So I just want to commend everybody for their patience. Thank you.
And with that, I think we can adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
You know, these
I'm
things
gonna, I'll be sending some emails out. I think some of the stuff we can just push along through email, and then we can decide whether we need within 4 weeks.
Yeah, I was